Did you know the myth of Kali is already alive by around the 6th century? But the earliest surviving stone depictions tied to that fierce Kali look don't show up until centuries later, around the 10th or 11th. So what happened in the gap? Why does the story exist long before the world starts carving her into stone? Welcome to Legends Reborn. Tonight, we're starting with the image everyone thinks they understand, Kali standing on Shiva. Then we'll test what's actually behind it. We'll begin with the earliest sources we can verify, track how the story changes across traditions, and leave the conclusion where it belongs, with you. The war had already been going for days when the air began to change. Durga stood at the center of the battlefield, still as a mountain, while the demons came in waves, loud with laughter, drunk on the idea that nothing could touch them. Chanda and Munda pushed forward like they owned the world, cutting through everything in their path, feeding on chaos the way fire feeds on oil. They weren't there to fight. They were there to take her. And then Durga frowned. Not in fear, not in doubt, but with a kind of focus so sharp it seemed to split the moment in half. The light around her dimmed, her face darkened, and from that frown, like something tearing free from the edge of her will, Kali appeared. Chanda and Munda turned too late. What came out of them wasn't a battle cry, not really. More like the first sharp taste of surprise, right before the world went quiet around them. When it was over, the battlefield felt rearranged, and Kali stood in the aftermath with the calm of something that had never needed permission. But the real problem still hadn't shown itself. Raktabija stepped forward smiling, unhurried, almost amused, as if the fight had already been decided. He let himself bleed like it didn't matter, because for him it didn't. Every drop that hit the earth became more of him, new bodies rising where the ground was touched. Durga's army struck one down and the space filled again, the numbers swelling until the field itself seemed to move. Kali watched it happen just once, long enough to understand the rule behind it, and then she moved. She didn't go after the body as much as the mechanism. She threw herself into the chaos, close enough to smother the trick before it could breathe, catching the blood before it could fall, and swallowing it before the earth could answer. The battlefield stopped multiplying and began to thin out, the surge of bodies faltering as the ground was denied its fuel. Raktabija's smile drained away as it happened, as if he could feel the rules shifting under his feet. And when he finally fell, nothing rose behind him. Only Kali. Oh. And if you're waiting for Shiva to enter this story, hold that thought. He does appear, just not yet. That story you just heard is old, older than most people realize. Scholars usually place this layer, the Devi Mahatmya version, somewhere around the 5th to 6th century CE. That means the Kali of Chanda and Munda, the Kali of Raktabija's blood trick, has been circulating for roughly 1500 years, passed down through recitation as much as writing. And it lives inside a specific current of Hindu tradition, the Shakta world, where the divine is centered on the goddess herself, Devi, Durga, Chandi, power not as an accessory, but as the source. In that tradition, this isn't just a myth you read once. But if we rewind even further, past the battlefield and past the festivals, the trail doesn't lead to a goddess at first. It leads to a word. Long before Kali becomes a figure with a face and a weapon, Kali shows up in an older kind of language, one that names forces instead of characters. In the Mundaka Upanishad, usually placed somewhere between about 450 and 200 before the Common Era, the word appears as one of the names for the 7 tongues of fire, the living flames of the sacrificial altar. It isn't the Kali of the demon wars. It's a label attached to fire itself, a way of naming something dark, consuming, and impossible to hold. That matters because it tells us something simple about the root of the name. Kali is tied to Kala, a Sanskrit word that can mean black or dark, and in another register, time. Time is the thing that devours everything it creates. The name carries both shadows at once, and over centuries, those shadows begin to overlap, until the dark one and the one of time start sounding like the same presence, from different angles. But this is where the timeline can trick you. That early Upanishadic Kali doesn't automatically explain the goddess's later appearance, and it doesn't mean the battlefield Kali was already fully formed in some ancient corner of scripture. What it gives us is a clue about the vocabulary people already had: darkness, fire, time, long before the myths gave that vocabulary a body. So when later traditions describe her skin as black, they're not inventing a random color. They're drawing on an old association the word itself already carried. The icon becomes vivid much later, but the name was already heavy with meaning. And that's the pattern we'll keep seeing with Kali. The earliest layer gives us a word, the next gives us a warrior, and only later do the images and explanations crystallize into the Kali the world thinks it recognizes. And once Kali exists as a force you can name, the myth doesn't stay in one shape for long. After around the year 600 CE, it starts changing faster than anyone can pin down. Because India doesn't carry its gods in a single straight line. It carries them the way rivers carry water, splitting, rejoining, changing color as they move through new ground. The Kali who erupts from Durga's fury on a battlefield is one current, but she doesn't remain only a warrior. In some places, she's remembered as a protector at the edge of the village, and in others, she becomes a mother you can speak to without lowering your voice. In the most intense traditions, she stops feeling like a character at all, and starts to feel like a limit, something that pushes past what polite language can safely name. Follow the story east, and Kali starts to feel closer to the home than the battlefield. In Bengal, she isn't only recalled as a weapon against demons, she's sung to, pleaded with, and approached with a tenderness that doesn't try to erase her terror. The skulls and the blood are still there, but they sit beside a kind of intimacy, as if the tradition is insisting that protection and destruction can share the same face. Move south, and her presence shifts again. There, the name often arrives through Bhadrakali, fierce and unmistakably divine, but shaped by local memory and lived ritual in ways that don't always match the northern stories line for line. She becomes the one invoked when disorder threatens to spill over, the force that cuts a boundary where fear wants to spread. And then there's the Kali you don't meet through a legend first, but through a practice. In tantric traditions, she becomes less a figure in a tale and more a reality you approach carefully, through symbols, discipline, and a kind of honesty most people avoid. Here, Kali isn't just the one who kills demons. She's the one who strips away illusion. She's time, not as a clock, but as the pressure that takes everything back. The same mouth that drinks blood becomes a mouth that devours the ego, and the same darkness that frightens becomes a darkness that hides nothing. And in some Shakta traditions, that idea goes even further. Kali isn't just a force inside the universe. She's described as the power the universe runs on, the reality underneath it, the one everything returns to. That's not the battlefield version of Kali. It's a later, deeper reading, where Kali stops being only a character and starts sounding like the name of the end itself. So when people argue about who Kali really is, they're often arguing across different layers of the same river. One layer gives you Kali as Durga's unleashed fury, the battle solution to an impossible enemy. Another gives you Kali as the mother people dare to love in the dark. And another treats her as the truth you can't bargain with. The myths don't cancel each other out, they stack. Which means the question isn't which Kali is correct, it's which Kali are you looking at, and who taught you to see her that way? We can't follow Kali through time without following the image that eclipsed the battlefield. Because somewhere along the timeline, around the year 1000, especially in Bengal's Shakta tradition, the story stops being only words, and it becomes a picture people carry in their heads. Kali with her tongue out, standing on Shiva. That pose doesn't belong to the earliest layer we started with. It belongs to later Shakta tradition, especially the Bengali world, where Kali becomes not only a warrior, but a presence you live with, worship, fear, and love. And once that image takes hold, it starts pulling new stories toward itself, almost like gravity. People begin asking the same question you're asking now. Why is Shiva under her feet? And what does it mean when the god of stillness lies beneath the goddess who won't stop moving? Here's the thing, people don't even agree on what that image is saying. So we'll take the most common version first, and then we'll come back to the other readings. So, remember when I told you to hold that thought, right after Kali and Raktabija? Here's why. Kali's story doesn't have just one ending, and Shiva doesn't end up beneath her for just one reason. That single image pulls in more than one explanation, and each one changes what you think you're looking at. The version most people know starts after the victory, not during it. So let's start there. Raktabija is gone. The battlefield is quieter than it has any right to be, and the air still tastes like iron and smoke. But Kali doesn't slow down with the war, because what's driving her now isn't strategy, it's momentum, power that keeps moving even after the enemy has stopped. She begins to dance, not as celebration, not as joy, but as a force still burning through its own heat. Each step lands like a verdict. The ground answers. The silence doesn't feel like peace, it feels like the world holding its breath. And that's when Shiva enters. He doesn't come like a warrior. He comes like stillness itself, walking straight into the path of the storm and lying down on the earth as if the only way to stop a fire is to give it nothing left to consume. Kali doesn't see him at first. Or maybe she does, and the momentum is already too far gone. Her foot comes down, and for a beat, it looks like the dance won't even notice what it's stepping on. Then the step lands on Shiva's chest, and everything changes. The movement pauses. The air tightens. The rage meets something that doesn't resist it, and suddenly there's room for awareness to return. An instant the later icon will freeze in place. And the scene locks into the pose the world remembers. Kali above, Shiva beneath. The entire universe balanced on a single instant of recognition. But that's not the only way this image is told. In some stories, Shiva isn't there to stop her at all. He's there on purpose, not as a victim, not as an obstacle, but as the one who steps beneath her because he wants to. Because in this version, the most shocking part of the image isn't her foot on his chest. It's his willingness to become the ground under it. Kali stands over him, fierce and unmistakable, and the scene reads differently the longer you hold it. Shiva isn't crushed, he's calm. He isn't defeated, he's offering himself. The stillness under her doesn't look like surrender to fear. It looks like devotion, like an admission that her power isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to honor. And suddenly the image stops being an emergency brake. It becomes a confession that the god of silence isn't above her or outside her, but beneath her, steady enough to hold what the world can't. In this version, even the tongue becomes part of the confession, an icon detail that hits before it explains. So the same pose that can look like a warning in one tradition becomes, in another, a declaration. Not because the storm had to be stopped, because the storm was sacred. But notice what just happened. Two stories, one image, and the meaning shifts depending on who's telling it. That's the first clue. Kali doesn't move through time as one fixed character. The earliest layer we followed, the Demon War layer, gives you Kali as the force that ends an impossible fight. The version most people recognize comes later, when devotion and ritual begin shaping her just as much as the old verses did. After around the year 600, Kali spreads beyond a single story. Her worship grows in different regions, and her role starts to bend with local tradition. Still fierce, but remembered in different ways. Then, around the year 1000, something changes in Bengal's Shakta world. The Shiva underfoot pose starts carrying serious weight, not as a side detail, but as a central icon people return to again and again. The image begins to pull stories toward itself, and by the 19th century, it spreads even faster. Prints and popular temple art, especially around Calcutta, carry that pose outward, until for many people, it becomes the default Kali they picture, before they've heard a single line of the older texts. So when someone says, "This is who Kali is," they often mean, "This is the image I inherited." And that's why we're doing it in this order. Once you see how the image took over, the objects in her hands stop feeling like random decoration. They start reading like a language. Now look closer at her hands. In most images, Kali isn't just standing there. She's holding a message. The blade comes first, the curved sword that looks made for war. But in the mythic language around her, it's doing more than killing bodies. It's the cut that separates what's real from what's pretending. The kind of violence aimed at the ego rather than the flesh. In the battlefield layer, it makes sense as a demon slayer. In the devotional and tantric readings, it becomes a symbol of what she takes from you when you're ready to be free. Then there's the severed head. If you look at it through a horror lens, it's pure threat, but in Kali's language, it often reads like a victory marker, sometimes over a demon, sometimes over something much closer. Ahead is where we place identity, pride, the story of me, and in her hand, it becomes a reminder that the hardest thing she can destroy isn't always an enemy you can point to. And the garland around her neck stops looking like decoration the moment you stop treating it like a movie prop. It starts to read like time itself, not time as a clock, but time as accumulation, lives that ended, names that disappeared, forms that couldn't hold. If you came to Kali hoping for a neat moral, the garland answers without softness. Nothing keeps its shape forever. Even her darkness carries meaning, before you attach fear to it. Kali's name is tied to darkness and to time, and that's why her skin is often shown in the deepest colors, sometimes black, sometimes deep blue. It isn't there to mark her as evil, it's there to mark her as what's underneath the surface world, the place where forms dissolve and certainty stops pretending it's in control. And then there's the tongue. In the demon war layer, the blood is the mechanism, and Kali breaks it by catching the drops before they ever reach the ground. Later, the same detail becomes a magnet for interpretation. Some read it as shame, others as ferocity, and others as a kind of intensity the body can't hide when something vast moves through it. The point isn't to rush toward a single meaning. It's to notice how one image can carry different voices depending on who's speaking. And sometimes, almost quietly, you'll catch a gesture that changes the whole mood, an open palm, turned outward, as if the image is saying, "Don't be afraid." Because Kali's iconography isn't only meant to terrify, it's meant to warn, to protect, and to tell you what kind of power you're standing in front of, before you decide how close you're willing to get. And this is where Kali starts to split the room. Because the same image that looks like horror from a distance can feel like protection up close. In devotion, she isn't introduced as a nightmare. She's introduced as Mother, Kali Ma, the one you can run to when the world turns violent, when fear won't leave, when the things you can't control start circling. That's the part outsiders often miss. Kali isn't loved because she's safe. She's loved because she's strong enough to go where safety ends. She takes the ugliest forces people are afraid to name, death, loss, hunger, time, and she wears them openly, like proof that none of it gets the final word unless she allows it. But to someone looking in from the outside, those same symbols can read like threat. The skulls become brutality, the tongue becomes bloodlust, the darkness becomes evil. And once that misunderstanding takes hold, it spreads fast, because fear is a simple story to export. So Kali becomes two things at once, depending on who's looking. In one frame, she's the protector who terrifies what terrifies you. In the other, she's the terrifying thing itself. And the difference isn't only religion, it's distance. It's whether you're hearing her name spoken with love, or seeing her image with no context at all. That's why this icon became so powerful, and so easy to weaponize. Because if you strip away the story and keep only the silhouette, you can make her mean almost anything you want. So the real question isn't whether Kali is mother or monster. It's who gets to decide which one you see. Quick reminder, Kali's story arrives in layers. The early demon war text, the later Shiva underfoot icon, and then the interpretations that collect around details like the tongue. Keep track of which layer you're hearing, and the contradictions start to make sense. So when someone says Kali means one thing, the best move is to ask what they're actually describing. An early story, a devotional image, or an interpretation that arrived afterward. Once you do that, the contradictions don't ruin the myth, they tell you how it traveled. So after all of this, what is Kali? She isn't one neat answer. In the oldest layer, she's the force that ends an impossible fight. In later devotion, she becomes someone people turn toward when life turns brutal, because she doesn't flinch at what everyone else avoids. And underneath both is the current that never leaves, Kali as the face of endings. Time doesn't negotiate, death doesn't apologize. In her, those realities are given form, and, depending on who you are, something that can feel like protection instead of terror. That's why the same icon can read as horror from a distance and devotion up close. So here's the question to leave you with. If Kali stands at the edge where humans panic, where the world changes shape, why do other cultures place powerful female figures at that same boundary too? Because once you start noticing that, Kali doesn't shrink, she connects. This is Legends Reborn, where the past still breathes. Thank you for watching and for staying with me all the way to the end. Kali can hit hard, especially when the image is louder than the context, so it means a lot that you chose to spend your time here. If Kali's story stayed with you, there's another door you'll recognize. I made a video on Holda, a figure that lingers at the threshold in Germanic folklore, where the rules of the world feel thin. I think you'll really like this one, so click the thumbnail on screen, and I'll see you there. Until the next story.